Ain't nothing wrong getting older, but if you 55 and you got 1,000 bottles of baby oil in the house, clearly, can't stop, won't stop. You're committed to the lifestyle. Because I'm 51, and I'm telling you, this is true. I can't remember a single time I ever threw an empty bottle of baby oil in the trash.
It hit like an alarm in the dead of a quiet night. Dave, the comedian known for dragging uncomfortable truths into the light, may have done it again. In his latest Netflix special, he reframes what once sounded like a harmless Hollywood story into something far more unsettling. The scene is simple. Years ago, he visited Diddy's house, everything immaculate, the vibe calm, almost ordinary. But then Diddy slowly stirred his drink and asked, "So, Dave, what are you into?" At the time, it felt like casual conversation. Now, in the shadow of Diddy's mounting legal troubles, that question lands differently. Less like small talk and more like a probe, a quiet test hiding behind a smile.
Now we should say that, remember, Diddy and his team were very upset when they found out that this footage was part of the documentary, and they tried to shut it down, but, you know,
the act of taping it is what
out.
is so
the
awful.
The act of taping it, right.
Without Agnifalo's
Diddy would say
knowledge.
that I didn't authorize that video going out, and the argument they've made is that he's the one who has the right, that he owns.
It's easy to see why the story landed with such force. Dave's timing couldn't have been more precise. As Diddy remains in federal custody facing racketeering and trafficking charges, one of comedy's most dissected voices delivers a monologue that suddenly connects all the dots: fame, silence, loyalty, and fear. Dave told the audience that nothing felt strange at the time. The house was immaculate, the floors steady, nothing slick or suspicious. Yet behind those pristine walls, federal prosecutors now allege a full-scale criminal enterprise was operating, one that used glamour and celebrity as camouflage for exploitation. For viewers watching The Unstoppable in December 2025, the moment didn't play like a joke at all. It felt like a revelation.
My friends ask me, they say, "Dave, did you know anything about those freak-off parties?" And I'll be like, "Nah, man. I didn't know anything about the freak-off." And they all look at me like,
played less like a joke and more like an admission. That simple question, "What are you into?" no longer sounded like casual conversation, but like a quiet probe, a way of measuring trust and silence, something prosecutors now frame as part of a much larger pattern. Dave laughed through the story on stage, yet the room's response was uneasy, shaped by everything that has surfaced since those parties came to light. Cassie Ventura's 2023 civil case, the surveillance footage, and lawsuits describing gatherings where luxury and control allegedly blurred together. Humor became his armor, but he drew a clear line by refusing to ridicule Cassie, instead calling her a gangster and recognizing the courage it took to speak publicly about deeply personal experiences. That moment wasn't comedy, it was empathy, and it revealed that even at his sharpest, Dave understood the seriousness of what was unfolding. You can hear the tension in the laughter, an audience realizing that stories once told as celebrity trivia now sound uncomfortably close to evidence. What lingers most is how ordinary it all appeared. A spotless house, a calm night, a casual drink, details so normal they make the story all the more unsettling.
Diddy really screwed up, and I'm not referring to his criminal trial, which has him sitting in prison right now, but it has to do with something that happened right before he got arrested. If you've seen the Netflix documentary about Diddy, Diddy The Reckoning, which 50 Cent produced, there's some footage there that had never been seen before. This is a photographer that Diddy hired to follow him around and document his life.
For years, Diddy's empire thrived on the same contradiction. Polished order on the surface, turmoil underneath. When federal agents raided his properties in 2024, they recovered items that quickly became shorthand for the alleged excess. Bottles of baby oil, private recordings, and guest lists that looked more like award show lineups. Spaces once used to celebrate deals and celebrity were suddenly recast as evidence in a sweeping RICO case. Dave's story resurfacing alongside renewed court headlines felt anything but accidental. When Diddy's trial began in May 2025, Prosecutors laid out details that echoed rumors long brushed off as fantasy, describing an alleged network where assistants, drivers, and executives enabled coercion. Hotel security was paid to erase footage, and people were recruited for so-called freak-offs that stretched for days and blurred legal and moral lines. Jurors heard claims involving intimidation, arson, and cash exchanged for silence. And with that context, every laugh in Dave's special carried a darker weight. The most unsettling moment came when Dave acknowledged a fact many had forgotten. In May 2022 at the Hollywood Bowl, when an armed man rushed the stage during his set, it was Diddy who tackled the attacker while security faltered. "He saved my life," Dave reminded the audience, a statement that wasn't a defense but a collision of gratitude, truth, and unease, capturing how conflicting realities can exist at the same time.
I think Sam Bankman-Fried were in the unit that was one floor above mine. So in terms of like the setting, it's a fairly decent chance that the room I'm describing is similar to where Diddy is.
It's easy to see why that admission triggered backlash. How do you reconcile the man who once saved your life with the man now accused of orchestrating violence against others? It's a contradiction Hollywood knows well. Public loyalty masking private terror. Dave didn't absolve Diddy. He made it clear that empathy doesn't cancel accountability, but it does complicate how we process people we thought we understood. In doing so, he exposed something far bigger: the entertainment industry's long-standing silence about the monsters it continues to protect. As the federal case unfolds, prosecutors are calling it one of the most complex celebrity indictments since R. Kelly, emphasizing that RICO charges aren't about isolated acts but about proving an organized system of control. Witnesses describe hierarchies, coded invitations, and loyalty tests disguised as parties, where refusal meant erasure and compliance allegedly brought rewards. That same dynamic may explain why Dave's harmless answer, books, video games, shut the conversation down that night. He simply wasn't playing along. Adding to the weight of it all, the Netflix documentary Sean Combs. The Reckoning, produced by 50 Cent and Alexandria Stapleton and released just weeks before Dave's special, reinforced what lawsuits had already suggested: a culture of fear, manipulation, and glamour used as a weapon. Former employees and artists described an empire that blurred creativity with control, with one associate calling it corporate trafficking dressed in champagne. The revelation that Combs himself filmed much of the footage, constantly recording and curating his own myth, made the timing of Dave's story impossible to dismiss.
Yeah, it's not surprising that they tried to get out in front of this and, tried to persuade Netflix not to come forward with it. I think it's an interesting argument because what they're claiming is, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, has had a long-standing, animosity against Diddy and sort of vice versa. And because he's at the helm, they're arguing this can't be taken seriously. This should sort of be seen as propaganda. And one of the things that Netflix hit back with was, yes, he's the executive producer. He doesn't necessarily have creative control.
As the world was still absorbing the documentary's claims, Dave stepped onto the stage and transformed his own proximity into a kind of testimony. He didn't need to name anyone. The context did the work for him. Jokes about baby oil, spotless floors, and loyalty landed with a new weight once paired with what we now know about those Beverly Hills nights, where streets that once hosted Diddy's legendary white parties have become case studies in how power shields itself until it collapses. Every detail suddenly feels symbolic. The clean floor, the measured question, the polite smile. Dave may not have recognized the darkness then, but he walked through the same gates many others never escaped. And that's what elevates the story beyond comedy into a cultural autopsy. It forces us to confront how charm and danger coexist in plain sight, how entertainment becomes camouflage, and how gratitude can mute truth when rescue and ruin come from the same hand. By the end of the special, we've learned as much about Hollywood as we have about Diddy. And Dave, who once walked away from millions to protect his integrity, returns to the spotlight with something that feels like both a confession and a warning. Yet the echoes travel far beyond the stage, into contracts, careers, and unspoken alliances, leaving one question growing louder beneath the applause. How much did Dave really see? How much does he still know? And what might he have chosen not to say when respect and discomfort collide? Proving that gratitude can become a prison when the person you owe it to turns out to be the most dangerous presence in the room.
You know what I'm saying? It wasn't only Big. It wasn't only Tupac. You understand? for the atmosphere that he put those kids in. You got a guy named Anthony Wolf Jones, who was from Bad Boy, from its conception as doing security and being one of the financiers of Puff having to have some money to keep Big and Craig Mack around.
Some point to Dave's early appearances at music industry events in the late 1990s, when he was still a young comic trying to break into the mainstream. A source who once worked on a Bad Boy entertainment television pilot recalls that Dave was always polite but noticeably distant, keeping his circle tight even as others scrambled to impress the mogul. According to that source, Diddy seemed to like Dave precisely because he wasn't chasing favors or validation, which may explain why he was invited over and why that seemingly casual question, "What are you into?" was asked in the first place. But that leads to the more unsettling question. Why tell this story now? Dave could have left it buried forever without consequence. Yet he chose to surface it in the middle of a cultural firestorm, just days before a jury began deliberating on Diddy's RICO charges. That choice feels deliberate, less like comedy and more like timing as a form of commentary. Because in this industry, timing is everything. When comedians start sounding like investigators, it usually means the jokes are brushing too close to the truth. Around the same period, Cat Williams reemerged on Club Shay Shay and turned an interview into something closer to an intervention, racking up tens of millions of views as he spoke about sealed contracts, hidden obligations, and the unspoken cost of access. His words wavered between humor and accusation as he suggested that the same forces that pushed him out were the ones that encouraged Dave's silence, warning that attendance itself becomes a test of loyalty. For years, that sounded like paranoia, but in the shadow of Diddy's collapse, it starts to resemble a roadmap. The parallels are hard to ignore. Both men reached the top, both walked away from enormous fortunes, both were branded unstable, and both resurfaced just as an empire began to crack. Williams has claimed he rejected deals worth tens of millions, some allegedly tied to producers in Diddy's orbit, saying the offers came with conditions that felt less like contracts and more like initiation rights. Rewatching that interview now, it sounds less like a rant and more like a description of how gatekeeping really works, reinforcing what insiders have long whispered, that Diddy wasn't just powerful, he was a gatekeeper who decided who got in and who stayed out.
When you get to the parties, they come out and collect everybody's phone. So now it's just your word against a billionaire. You're gonna lose.
The kind who never handed out keys, but waited to see who would try the lock. Diddy's infamous white parties in the Hamptons were once described by former publicist Rob Shooter as royal court gatherings where careers could rise or collapse overnight, drawing A-list celebrities, rising stars, political donors, and even rumored royalty. Yet multiple lawsuits and witness statements presented in federal court now suggest those glittering nights doubled as recruitment grounds for something far darker, where guests weren't just entertained, they were observed. Seen through that lens, Dave's story shifts meaning entirely, and the question, "What are you into?" stops sounding like small talk and starts to feel like a coded test measuring curiosity, compliance, and fear. Those who passed were allegedly pulled closer into Diddy's inner circle, where loyalty was rewarded and resistance punished, while those who failed seemed to disappear quietly as careers stalled and invitations dried up. The same figures who once boasted about proximity to Diddy began avoiding his name altogether once indictments surfaced. And hovering over all of it is the bitter irony that the man now accused of running a criminal enterprise was also the one who once tackled an armed attacker to protect Dave.
In October. Right. In October 3rd. If the judge denies bail, then Trump is going to make a decision possibly immediately thereafter. Most likely, the judge is going to, based on previous decisions, it feels like the judge is going to deny bail.
The savior turned suspect. It sounds almost too cinematic to be true, yet Dave confirmed it himself on stage. That contradiction sits at the emotional core of the story. How do you publicly condemn a man who once saved your life? That moral tension likely explains the careful tone of Dave's special. It wasn't fear that made him measured, but conflict. At the same time, federal prosecutors presented Diddy's empire not as reckless excess, but as a tightly organized operation. In court, sketches showed him sitting quietly while witnesses described a system of coercion disguised as entertainment. Former assistants testified about meticulously planned freak-offs, multi-day private events involving travel logistics, deliveries, and rigid NDA enforcement. Security personnel said they were paid to erase footage, hotel managers spoke of hush money, and artists admitted they stayed silent because speaking out meant exile. When the Netflix documentary Sean Combs, The Reckoning premiered, it reinforced many of those accounts, making the allegations harder to dismiss as rumor.
Footage ended up going to 50 Cent and his production company, and it's kind of the centerpiece.
Sold to them.
Yes, was the centerpiece of the documentary. So watch this particular scene, because this is where a lot of people feel Diddy really screwed over someone that he should be very, very thankful for.
Co-produced by 50 Cent and directed by Alexandria Stapleton, the documentary featured accounts from bad boy employees, artists, and even jurors from the federal trial, painting a portrait of a man obsessed with recording himself, capturing every corner of his empire as if constant documentation could shield him from accountability. Seen through that lens, Dave's story fits seamlessly. A moment that looked ordinary on the surface, with a darker subtext lurking just off camera. All these threads converge. Dave's quiet moral conflict, Cat Williams' once-dismissed warnings, and Diddy's legal collapse, all circling the same question of what fame ultimately demands in exchange for survival. When Dave walked away from a $50 million Comedy Central deal years ago, many called it insanity, but in hindsight it may have been foresight, an instinctive rejection of a system he understood too well. Williams suggested that many who stayed simply couldn't afford to leave, choosing silence paid for in cash, favors, and leverage rather than talent. An entertainment attorney familiar with civil suits against Diddy's companies echoed that reality, noting how easily power can manipulate when it knows someone's pressure points. From that perspective, Dave's retreat to Ohio wasn't escape but refusal, an unwillingness to be controlled. Even now, with Diddy behind bars and appealing his case, the shockwaves continue as former collaborators quietly distance themselves while bracing for subpoenas. Cassie Ventura's 2023 lawsuit marked the rupture. Once the footage surfaced, the silence broke, unleashing more suits, testimonies, and questions about who else knew. Some insiders claim hours of unreleased recordings still exist, material that could implicate celebrities, executives, even politicians, and if true, the fallout could eclipse anything seen since Me Too. Through it all, Dave stands apart because he hasn't rewritten his past. He simply told it as he lived it. Clean floors, a strange question, an awkward laugh, and hindsight that now feels chilling. That's why his Netflix special resonates so deeply. It isn't an expose, it's a mirror, showing how easily someone can walk through a door believing it's a party, only to realize years later it was an audition.
Look at Diddy, for instance. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at him. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at, he has videos. He has videos of the parties. Now, what I've heard, which I don't know how much of it is in mainstream media, I don't really follow the story that much, but what I've heard from friends that are attorneys, friends of mine that have represented me before, agents and so on, is there's a bidding war going on right now.
Behind the jokes lies a stark warning for every artist still chasing the spotlight. Hollywood doesn't give fame away, it rents it, and when the bill comes due, most people never realize what they've been paying with. Dave and Cat Williams may be among the few who spotted the invoice early enough to walk away. As Diddy's empire unravels, others are finding their voices. Former bodyguards, assistants, and even bad boy artists are reportedly lining up interviews and book deals, claiming they know which powerful figures attended those notorious gatherings. One former associate says several A-list actors and executives are quietly preparing for subpoenas as investigators continue mapping the network around Combs' business interests. During the 2024 raids, the FBI allegedly seized more than 100 digital devices, many belonging to staff rather than Diddy himself, and whatever stored on them could reshape Hollywood's power structure. Perhaps the most unsettling twist is how comedy became the delivery system for truth. Both Dave and Williams used laughter to slip hard realities into public view. When Williams said he was canceled for talking about Harvey before the headlines, it once sounded bitter. Now it reads like a receipt. When Dave jokes about traction on the floor, he isn't talking about flooring. He's exposing the illusion of safety. It's satire as a survival mechanism. And the sense remains that this story isn't finished. Diddy's lawyers insist on his innocence, calling the allegations exaggerated theater, but the weight of the case keeps growing. Dozens of witnesses, hundreds of sealed documents, and persistent whispers that federal agents are still tracing financial trails tied to offshore accounts.
And all Diddy had to say was, Your Honor, I will accept the Mann Act, but I feel like I was targeted by a weaponized Justice Department, and I now understand what President Trump was saying when he said that happened to him, because we have similar things that happen, and I appreciate what he was saying now. I didn't understand it then, but I understand.
For a man once hailed as the architect of modern hip-hop, the collapse feels almost biblical, and for the comedians who watched it from the edges, it's a mix of vindication and grief. The real question isn't whether Diddy is guilty. That's for the courts. But how many people saw the warning signs and chose silence? How many spotless floors and ordinary nights passed before the truth finally surfaced? Dave's story may be the gentlest version of a much harsher reality, a hindsight map of complicity where gratitude, guilt, and fear kept some of the biggest names in entertainment quiet. If Diddy truly was a gatekeeper, how many stars still owe favors they can't repay? How many walked through his doors thinking they were networking only to become bound by secrets they'll never say out loud? You can almost picture it. The parties, the unspoken rules, conversations that began with "What are you into?" and ended careers before they ever began. Laughter echoing through halls, cameras always rolling, control sustained by silence. And as Dave stands on stage laughing at the absurdity of it all, it becomes clear he's doing what almost no one else did, explaining what it felt like to survive. So was walking away from $50 million rebellion or self-preservation? Did he see the storm before anyone else? Or is there still more he hasn't said? Whatever the answer, this story isn't finished. The walls around Hollywood's most powerful figures are cracking, each new revelation sending shockwaves through the system that protected them. Maybe next time it won't be a comedian with the microphone, but someone who was inside the house when the door finally locked. Until then, the whispers continue, the dominoes wait, and if Dave and Williams are right, this isn't just a scandal, it's a reckoning.